March 17, 1945. Bavarian countryside, 12 kilometers west of Landshut. The apple orchard still held winter's grip, branches bare against a sky streaked with smoke from distant Dresden. Elsa Müller had lived 43 years in this valley, watching seasons turn with the reliable indifference of earth and root. Her husband buried in Stalingrad. Her sons, one missing near Kursk, the other conscripted 3 months ago, existed now only in photographs and the cruel arithmetic of war. She heard the aircraft before she saw it, a wounded animal sound, engines screaming their mechanical death. The B-17 emerged from cloud cover trailing black smoke, too low, struggling toward some impossible salvation. When it struck the eastern hillside, the explosion rattled her windows but did not surprise her. War had taught her to expect such punctuation. What surprised her was the parachute, white silk against scorched earth, and beneath it a figure struggling in harness. An American. Enemy. Liberator. The words had lost meaning in 43 months of widowhood. She saw only a man bleeding in her neighbor's field, and she remembered what her grandmother once said, Wasser kennt keine Fahne. Water knows no flag. The decision took 3 heartbeats. Then Elsa Müller walked toward the fallen pilot with a tin cup in her hand. The American pilot, Lieutenant James Hartwell, 8th Air Force 351st Bombardment Group, had survived 4 minutes of aerial combat over Munich, 12 seconds of freefall before his chute deployed, and 1 catastrophic landing that shattered his left ankle against Bavarian limestone. He was 22 years old and had believed, with the absolute certainty of youth and propaganda, that Germans were either fanatics or cowards, monsters or collaborators. He had not expected the woman. She appeared like something from a medieval woodcut. Dark dress, gray shawl, face carved by deprivation into angles that spoke of rationed bread and absent men. She knelt beside him without speaking, examined his ankle with hands that knew injury, then offered water from a tin cup that bore the stamp of the Wehrmacht. He drank. The water tasted of Wellstone and charity. Around them, the machinery of the Third Reich continued its final convulsions. Landshut had become a waypoint for refugees fleeing the Soviet advance from the east. Columns of civilians mixing with retreating Wehrmacht units, Hitler Youth Brigades still clutching their ideological certainty like talismans against reality. The Gestapo maintained offices in town. The SS had established a security zone. American bombers crossed these skies daily, occasionally drawing fire from anti-aircraft batteries that had long since exhausted their effectiveness. Elsa Müller understood the calculus. Helping an enemy combatant constituted high treason under Nazi law. The penalty was death, often public, always certain. The local SS commander, Hauptsturmführer Klaus Reinhardt, had executed a farmer in December for hiding a French POW. The man's body hung in the village square for 3 days as pedagogy, but Lieutenant Hartwell could not walk. His ankle had swollen to twice its normal size, bone fragments grinding beneath purpled skin. He needed splinting, shelter, time to heal or be captured by advancing American forces expected within weeks. Elsa made her assessment in silence, calculating distances, loyalties, risks. She helped him to his feet, foot, and became his crutch. Her barn stood 200 meters across fallow fields. Inside, between hay bales and her last remaining milk cow, she created a hiding place. She brought him water again, and bread that represented 2 days of her ration, and she did not ask why she was doing this. Some acts exist beyond interrogation, rooted in a moral architecture that war cannot entirely demolish. 3 days later, someone informed the SS. The informant was never officially identified, though Elsa suspected Friedrich Weber, her neighbor to the south, a party member since 1933, a man who wore his swastika pin even when feeding chickens. Weber had watched her cross the fields that morning of March 17th, had seen her moving with purpose toward the crash site. In a dying regime, denunciation remained one of the last available currencies of power. Hauptsturmführer Reinhardt received the report with the methodical attention he applied to all matters of security. At 41, he represented a particular type of Nazi officer, not ideologically rabid, not personally sadistic, but absolutely committed to order, hierarchy, and the enforcement of law as defined by the state. He had witnessed the Wehrmacht's retreat across Eastern Europe, had processed intelligence about Soviet atrocities, and had concluded that maintaining discipline among German civilians represented the only bulwark against total collapse. Treason could not be tolerated regardless of motivation. He assembled a squad, 6 SS soldiers, 2 Gestapo observers, 1 police lieutenant from Landshut. They would conduct the arrest at dawn on March 20th, allowing precisely enough time for the Americans to advance no closer than 8 kilometers. The operation would be swift, public, exemplary. The woman would be tried before a mobile people's court, convicted within hours, and executed before sunset. The American pilot would be transferred to a POW facility if cooperative, or shot if not. Reinhardt reviewed the file on Elsa Müller. 2 sons in the Wehrmacht. Husband killed at Stalingrad. No political affiliations. Model citizen until 3 days ago. He noted this with neither sympathy nor satisfaction. Simply data points in a larger equation. The Reich was dying. He knew this. But it would die according to its own laws. Lieutenant Hartwell, hidden in the barn, knew nothing of these preparations. He spent those 3 days in a fog of pain and morphine delirium, watching Elsa move through her daily routines with the silent efficiency of someone who had long ago stopped expecting life to offer explanations. She brought him food, changed his bandages, asked no questions about his missions or whether he had bombed civilian targets. Once, he attempted gratitude in broken German. She silenced him with a gesture. Unnecessary. Dangerous. Done. On the night of March 19th, Elsa Müller stood in her empty kitchen and understood that her life had reached its final chapter. Dawn arrived with frost and absolute clarity. Elsa woke at 4:47 a.m., not from external sound but from the internal alarm that women in wartime develop, that animal sense of approaching finality. She dressed in her Sunday clothes, the black wool dress she had worn to her husband's memorial service, the good shoes she had resoled twice, the silver cross her mother had given her at confirmation. If death was coming, she would meet it with the dignity her grandmother had taught her. She did not wake the American pilot. Let him sleep. Let him have a few more hours of ignorance before soldiers discovered him, and whatever followed, followed. Instead, she walked to her kitchen and began preparing what would be her last meal. She used her final potato, her last 3 eggs, the small portion of butter she had saved for Easter. The cooking was meditation. Routine transformed into ritual. Outside, the sun broke across the Bavarian hills, illuminating a landscape that would continue regardless of whether Elsa Müller lived or died. Somehow this brought comfort. The trucks arrived at 6:15 a.m., not at dawn as Reinhardt had planned. Military logistics being imperfect even in apocalypse. 3 vehicles, a command car, a transport truck, 1 motorcycle with sidecar. They stopped at her gate with practiced precision, engines cutting simultaneously. The silence after was profound. Hauptsturmführer Reinhardt emerged first, uniform immaculate despite the dirt roads and collapsing infrastructure. Behind him, 6 SS soldiers fanned out with weapons ready but not raised. They expected an old woman, not resistance. The Gestapo observers remained by the vehicles, taking notes, documenting everything for files that would never be properly archived. Elsa opened her door before they knocked. This simple act, opening rather than waiting, shifted something in the dynamic. She stood in her doorway with her hands visible, no weapon, no fear apparent in her expression. Reinhardt had conducted hundreds of arrests. He recognized defiance when it wore the mask of cooperation. Frau Müller, he began, his voice carrying the formal distance of official business. You are accused of providing aid to an enemy combatant in violation of Reich security law. You will accompany us for questioning. Elsa nodded once. The American is in the barn. He cannot walk. His injuries require medical attention. Reinhardt blinked. Confession, immediate and complete, was not typical. It complicated the theater of interrogation. 2 soldiers moved toward the barn while Reinhardt studied Elsa with renewed attention. In his experience, people who confessed immediately fell into categories. The broken, who sought any end to uncertainty. The fanatical, who believed their actions righteous regardless of consequence. Or the calculating, who understood that cooperation might purchase mercy. Elsa Müller seemed none of these. She stood in her doorway with the exhausted patience of someone who had already made peace with outcome. You understand the severity of your crime? Reinhardt asked, following protocol though he suspected the answer. I understand that a wounded man needed water, Elsa replied. I understand that I am German and Christian and that both identities once meant something before we decided they didn't. One of the Gestapo observers stepped forward, sensing sedition beyond the immediate charge. But Reinhardt raised a hand, stopping him. Something in this interaction interested him. a moral clarity that had become increasingly rare as the Reich consumed itself. He had spent 4 years enforcing laws that transformed ordinary decency into capital crime. He had never questioned this duty, but recently, as Soviet forces advanced and American bombers obliterated German cities with increasing impunity, he had begun to notice the accumulating absurdities. From the barn came Lieutenant Hartwell, supported between two soldiers, his face gray with pain. The young American looked at Elsa with an expression of bewildered gratitude and horror, understanding now that his survival had purchased her destruction. He tried to speak, to claim coercion, to absolve her, but Reinhardt's gesture silenced him. "The pilot will be transferred to Wehrmacht custody for processing," Reinhardt announced. "Frau Müller, you are under arrest for treason against the German Reich. You will be held for trial." Elsa accepted this with a nod. She turned to enter her house to collect nothing. What did one take to one's execution when a sound stopped them all? From the east, distinct and growing, artillery, not the distant rumble they had grown accustomed to, but close thunder, the kind that meant American forces had advanced faster than intelligence predicted. Reinhardt checked his watch. 6:43 a.m. According to his last briefing, American units were supposed to be 12 kilometers away. This sound suggested 5, perhaps less. The mathematics of arrest and trial suddenly confronted the logistics of retreat. He made his decision with characteristic efficiency. "Load both prisoners into the transport. We move immediately." The convoy departed Elsa's property at 6:51 a.m., heading not toward Landshut, but northeast, toward the temporary SS command post established near Dingolfing. Reinhardt's orders had been to conduct a public trial in Landshut Square, but American advance had rendered that impossible. Instead, he would deliver prisoners to his superior, Sturmbannführer Otto Krebs, who maintained mobile judicial authority for the region. Elsa and Lieutenant Hartwell rode in the back of the transport truck, guarded by 2 young SS soldiers who looked barely 18. Neither prisoner spoke. Between them existed a debt that language could not properly articulate: gratitude, guilt, the terrible intimacy of shared mortality. Hartwell's ankle throbbed with each bump in the road, but this pain seemed trivial compared to watching the woman who had saved him being driven toward execution. The younger of the 2 guards, his name tag read Hoffman, kept glancing at Elsa with visible discomfort. He had joined the SS 9 months ago, motivated less by ideology than by the promise of better rations and the desperate desire to avoid frontline service. In training, enemies had been abstractions, subhumans, terrorists, threats to the fatherland. Elsa Müller, sitting quietly in her Sunday dress with her hands folded in her lap, did not match these categories. "Why did you do it?" Hoffman finally asked, breaking protocol. "Why help him?" Elsa considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. "My sons are soldiers. Somewhere, perhaps, someone has shown them water when they needed it. Perhaps not. But I wanted to live in a world where such things were still possible." The older guard, Schneider, laughed harshly. "That world is dead, old woman. Has been for years." "Perhaps," Elsa agreed, "but I am not dead yet, so I can still act as if it isn't." This logic seemed to baffle Schneider into silence. The convoy continued northeast, navigating roads clogged with refugees and retreating Wehrmacht units. The organizational collapse of the Third Reich's final weeks was visible everywhere. Burned vehicles pushed into ditches, abandoned equipment, civilians carrying their possessions in handcarts and wheelbarrows. Above, 2 American fighter planes circled, but did not attack. They had larger targets than a single transport convoy. Reinhardt, in the command car ahead, monitored radio traffic. The military situation was deteriorating faster than official reports acknowledged. American forces had crossed the Isar River at multiple points. Soviet armies were approaching from the northeast. Somewhere in Berlin, the Führer was issuing orders to armies that no longer existed. They reached the temporary command post at 8:30 a.m., a requisitioned monastery that offered thick stone walls and cellars suitable for detention. Sturmbannführer Otto Krebs maintained his headquarters in what had been the abbot's residence, surrounded by filing cabinets salvaged from burning government offices, maps showing increasingly untenable defensive positions, and the skeletal staff of an administration governing territory it would lose within days. Krebs was 53, a career officer who had served in the First World War and never quite recovered from that generation's peculiar mixture of disillusionment and duty. He received Reinhardt's report with tired eyes, glancing at the documents, then at Elsa Müller standing before his desk with quiet dignity. Frau Müller, Krebs began, his voice carrying none of Reinhardt's formal distance, only exhaustion. You understand that by law I must convene a tribunal. The verdict is predetermined. The sentence is death. This will occur before sunset today. I understand, Elsa replied. Do you wish to make any statement? To explain your actions? Some women in your position have claimed confusion, coercion, temporary insanity. I can often work with such claims. Elsa shook her head. I gave water to a wounded man. I do not claim confusion. I was neither coerced nor insane. I knew the law and I violated it deliberately because the law had become obscene. Krebs winced at this directness. Reinhardt, standing beside the desk, felt something shift in his careful compartmentalization of duty and conscience. The old woman was forcing them to see the machinery they operated, to acknowledge the specific human cost of each bureaucratic action. You make this very difficult, Frau Müller, Krebs said quietly. I do not intend to make anything easy for you, Elsa replied. You are going to kill me for showing mercy. I will not pretend this is justice, and neither should you. In the corner, Lieutenant Hartwell listened through the translator, one of Krebs's staff who spoke English. The American pilot had bombed German cities from 20,000 feet, had celebrated successful missions with his crew, had never confronted the individual faces of the destruction he helped create. Now he watched a German woman defend the simple act of giving him water, preparing to die for this charity, and something in his understanding of the war cracked open. Krebs dismissed them both. Hold them in the cellar. Tribunal at 1400 hours. The monastery cellar had held wine once, then refugees, now prisoners. Stone walls wept with groundwater. A single barred window near the ceiling admitted gray light, and the sound of trucks moving in the courtyard above. Elsa sat on a wooden bench, hands folded, breathing the damp air of her final hours. Lieutenant Hartwell sat across from her, ankle splinted now by the Wehrmacht medic, who had examined him with professional indifference. I'm sorry, Hartwell said finally in broken German supplemented with desperate gestures. I'm so sorry. You shouldn't have helped me. You should have let me die. Elsa studied the young American with gentle curiosity. Would that have been better? For you to die in a field and for me to live 3 more weeks before the war ended? What would I have gained except the knowledge that I had refused mercy when it was needed? You would have gained your life. Life is not the same as living, Elsa replied. I had already lost my husband and my sons to this war. I had already lost the country I thought I knew. What remained of me except the ability to choose how I would act when confronted with another human being suffering? You took nothing from me, Lieutenant. The Reich took everything already. I only chose not to let them take my humanity as well. Hartwell struggled with this reasoning, shaped as he was by American pragmatism and the belief that survival constituted victory. In his training, they had emphasized escape and evasion, never surrender, maximum effort to return to duty. No one had prepared him for a German widow sacrificing herself for his water. Above them, the tribunal was being prepared. 3 officers would constitute the court, Krebs as presiding judge, Reinhardt as prosecutor, a Wehrmacht Hauptmann named Fischer as defense counsel, though in such tribunals, defense meant documenting the prisoner's cooperation, not arguing innocence. The verdict was predetermined. Only the specific wording of the sentence required determination. At 1 p.m., footsteps echoed on the cellar stairs. But instead of guards coming to escort Elsa to tribunal, it was Hoffman, the young SS soldier from the convoy. He approached Elsa with visible nervousness, glancing over his shoulder to ensure he wasn't observed. Frau Müller, he whispered urgently, there are some of us who, we're going to help you. Tonight, after the sentence. We're going to help you escape. Elsa looked at the boy with infinite sadness. No, child. You are not. Hoffman blinked in confusion. But Frau Müller, they're going to execute you. We have a plan. Schneider and I and 2 others, we can get you into the forest before... Before what? Elsa interrupted gently. Before I become your burden instead of the Reich's? Before you transform yourselves into traitors to save a traitor? Before you risk execution for my escape, thereby multiplying the death count rather than reducing it? But it's not right, Hoffman insisted, his voice breaking with the certainty of youth confronting injustice for the first time. You gave water, that's all. Water. They're going to kill you for mercy. Yes, Elsa agreed. They are. And that fact will remain true whether I die today or escape to die of pneumonia in some forest hiding place next week. But if I escape, you die too. and Schneider, and whoever else joins your noble, foolish plan." She stood, approaching the young soldier with the maternal authority that transcends circumstance. "Listen to me, Hoffman. The war is ending. Everyone knows this, even if we cannot say it aloud. You have perhaps 2 weeks, maybe less, before American or Soviet forces arrive here. 2 weeks until you must decide what kind of man you wish to be in the world that follows. Do not stain that future by adding my escape to your conscience." "But we could save you." "You cannot save me," Elsa said firmly. "The moment I gave that American water, my death was determined. Not by you, not by Reinhardt or Krebs, but by a system that has forgotten how to recognize humanity. You cannot save me, but you can save yourselves by refusing to participate in that system's final atrocities." Hoffman stood paralyzed between duty and decency, that terrible liminal space where good men discover they serve evil masters. Before he could respond, heavier footsteps sounded on the stairs. Reinhardt appeared, his expression neutral, his presence absolute. "Hoffman, return to your post. Frau Müller, the tribunal is convened. You will come with me now." Elsa straightened her dress, touched Hoffman's arm once, a gesture of forgiveness for his inability to save her, and walked toward the stairs with her head up. Lieutenant Hartwell watched her go, understanding that he was witnessing something his training had never prepared him for: courage without hope of reward, mercy without possibility of reciprocation, dignity in the face of annihilation. The tribunal chamber was the monastery's former library, books long since burned for heat or pulped for propaganda leaflets. 3 officers sat behind a table bearing the Reich's eagle emblem, slightly tarnished. Krebs in the center, Reinhardt to his right, Hauptmann Fischer to his left. A court secretary documented proceedings in meticulous shorthand. 6 soldiers stood as witnesses, required by law to observe justice being administered. The proceeding lasted 17 minutes. Reinhardt presented evidence. Testimony from Friedrich Weber regarding Elsa's movement toward the crash site, the American pilot's presence in her barn, her own confession. Fischer offered a perfunctory defense noting Elsa's 2 sons in Wehrmacht service, her deceased husband, her previous cooperation with local authorities. He did not argue innocence, the facts precluded this, but suggested leniency, given her service to the Reich through her family's sacrifice. Krebs listened with the exhausted attention of a man who had presided over too many such tribunals. He glanced occasionally at Elsa, who stood before the court with her hands clasped, her expression neither defiant nor submissive, simply present. When Fischer completed his brief defense, Krebs addressed her directly. "Frau Müller, do you wish to make a statement before sentence is pronounced?" Elsa considered this carefully. "I wish to say only that I am not ashamed of my actions. I acted according to the principles my parents taught me, my church affirmed, and my conscience required. If these principles contradict the law, then the law has lost its connection to morality." One of the observing soldiers shifted uncomfortably. Reinhardt's jaw tightened. Fischer looked down at his papers. Only Krebs held Elsa's gaze, and in his eyes she recognized something she had not expected: agreement. The Sturmbannführer believed her correct, even as he prepared to order her death. "This court finds Elsa Müller guilty of treason against the German Reich as defined under wartime security statutes," Krebs announced, his voice mechanical, purged of emotion through long practice. "The sentence is death by firing squad, to be carried out at 1700 hours today in the monastery courtyard. May God have mercy on your soul." Elsa nodded acceptance. As guards moved to escort her back to the cellar, she paused and addressed Krebs directly. "When this war ends, Herr Sturmbannführer, and you are asked what you did, I hope you remember that you had choices. We all did. The hours between sentence and execution stretched with the strange elasticity of final time." Elsa returned to the cellar where Lieutenant Hartwell waited with haunted eyes. A priest arrived, Father Benedict from the village, summoned to provide final sacrament. He was 70, had baptized Elsa's sons, had buried her husband in absentia. "I am sorry, Elsa," he said simply. "As am I, Father. But sorry changes nothing." They spoke briefly of confession, communion, last rites. Elsa accepted these rituals with quiet sincerity, not from fear of damnation but from respect for forms that had sustained her through 5 decades of life. Father Benedict gave her bread that was not quite bread, wine that was not quite wine, speaking words worn smooth by 2,000 years of repetition. In this moment, theology mattered less than continuity. The linking of her death to the countless deaths that had come before, the assertion that her ending meant something beyond mere termination. Lieutenant Hartwell, not Catholic, but desperately needing to participate, asked Father Benedict if he could pray with them. The priest agreed. The three sat together in the damp cellar, hands joined, speaking to a God whose presence seemed simultaneously urgent and distant. Hartwell prayed in English, Elsa in German, Father Benedict in Latin. The confusion of languages seemed appropriate for a war that had confused everything. At 4:45 p.m., Reinhardt appeared again. Behind him, 4 soldiers with rifles. The execution squad, selected from among the older enlisted men who had survived enough warfare to perform such duties without psychological collapse. Reinhardt's expression remained professionally neutral, but his hands trembled slightly, a detail Elsa noticed and chose not to acknowledge, offering him this small dignity. "It is time, Frau Müller." She stood, embraced Father Benedict, then turned to Lieutenant Hartwell. The American pilot was weeping now, all pretense of military stoicism abandoned. Elsa approached him, placed her hands on his shoulders. "Listen to me," she said in careful English learned from a schoolbook decades ago. "You will survive this war. You will go home. And when people ask you about Germans, about what we were, I want you to remember that some of us tried to remain human. Yes?" Hartwell nodded, unable to speak. Elsa kissed his forehead once, a gesture that transcended nationality, ideology, uniform, and walked toward the stairs with steady steps. The monastery courtyard was small, enclosed by stone walls that had witnessed centuries of monastic discipline. Now it served as killing ground. A wooden post had been erected against the eastern wall, positioned so the setting sun would not blind the firing squad. Professional consideration, even in atrocity. Elsa walked across the courtyard escorted by Reinhardt and Father Benedict. The execution squad stood at attention, rifles held with parade ground precision. Krebs observed from the covered walkway, along with several other officers and the mandatory witnesses. No crowd gathered. This was not public spectacle but bureaucratic necessity, justice administered in near privacy. They offered to bind her hands and blindfold her. Elsa refused both. "I wish to see what you are doing," she said, "and I wish you to see me." This simple refusal complicated the ritual. Executions proceeded more smoothly when the condemned cooperated with their own erasure, when blindfolds and bindings transformed humans into abstract targets. Elsa's insistence on visibility forced the execution squad to confront the specific face of the woman they would kill. Reinhardt positioned her against the post, then stepped back. Father Benedict recited final prayers. Somewhere in the monastery, Lieutenant Hartwell sat in his cellar cell, listening to the preparations he could not see but could imagine with terrible clarity. He pressed his hands against the stone wall, as if he could push through rock and time to undo the simple act of asking for water. The squad raised their rifles. 4 men, 4 weapons, 1 blank cartridge distributed randomly among them. The traditional mercy that allowed each executioner to believe he might not be responsible for the killing shot. Elsa looked at them without anger, without fear, with only a terrible sadness for what they were being made to do. Krebs checked his watch. 4:59 p.m. Procedure required the presiding officer to give the command. He opened his mouth to speak, and stopped. From beyond the monastery walls came a sound that had become grimly familiar. Artillery fire. Much closer now, close enough to rattle windows. And beneath that thunder a different sound. Tracked vehicles, many of them approaching from the west. American tanks. Krebs looked at Reinhardt. Reinhardt looked at the execution squad. The squad looked at Elsa, who remained silent against her post, waiting for death or deliverance, prepared to accept whichever arrived first. The American Advance Patrol, 3 Sherman tanks and 2 armored personnel carriers from the 14th Armored Division, breached the monastery's outer wall at 5:03 p.m., not intentionally but because the lead tank's driver misjudged a turn on the narrow approach road. Stone that had stood for 4 centuries collapsed under 30 tons of steel, and through the gap poured soldiers who had fought across France and now swept through Bavaria with the momentum of inevitable victory. The SS guards in the courtyard faced an impossible calculation: fight and die defending a monastery-turned headquarters that had no strategic value, or surrender and survive. Most chose survival. Weapons clattered to cobblestones. Hands rose. Krebs walked slowly into the courtyard, his sidearm holstered, his hands visible. He approached the American captain commanding the patrol, a young man from Ohio who had expected more resistance, and offered formal surrender in precise English. I am Sturmbannführer Otto Krebs. I deliver this facility and all personnel to your custody. The captain accepted with bewildered efficiency. His sergeant began processing prisoners, separating SS from Wehrmacht, documenting names. Another soldier discovered Lieutenant Hartwell in the cellar, injured but alive, and the story began to emerge in fragments. The crash, the water, the arrest, the tribunal, and in the courtyard, still standing against the post where she had prepared to die, Elsa Mueller waited with extraordinary calm. An American medic approached her cautiously. Uncertain whether she was prisoner or victim, she spoke to him in careful English. I am not injured, but there is a young man in the cellar who needs attention for his ankle. Within 30 minutes, the monastery had transformed from Reich Administrative Center to American military waypoint. Prisoners were processed, documents secured, defensive positions established. Lieutenant Hartwell emerged from the cellar on a stretcher, saw Elsa alive, and began weeping again, this time from relief rather than guilt. Krebs and Reinhardt were separated for interrogation. The execution squad was disarmed and detained. Father Benedict moved among the chaos, offering what comfort he could to Germans and Americans alike, and Elsa sat on a stone bench in the courtyard, watching the sun set on March 20th, 1945, watching the Reich complete its collapse, watching the impossible happen. She had survived her own execution by 4 minutes. Sometimes history's timing is indistinguishable from grace. Lieutenant James Hartwell returned to the United States in June 1945. His ankle healed, but his understanding of warfare permanently altered. He testified at war crimes tribunals about the events of March 1945, though his testimony primarily concerned German officers who had attempted to save his life or had presided over his rescuers near execution. The moral categories he had carried into combat, ally and enemy, righteous and wicked, had dissolved in a Bavarian courtyard, replaced by more difficult questions about courage, compassion, and the choices individuals make within collapsing systems. He maintained correspondence with Elsa Mueller for 37 years, until her death in 1982. She never left Bavaria, never sought recognition for her act of mercy, never claimed heroism. She rebuilt her house, tended her orchard, and waited for news of her sons that never came. Both were listed as missing, presumed dead. She lived her final decades as a widow who had given water to an enemy and survived by accident of timing rather than design. Hauptsturmführer Reinhardt faced Allied tribunals but was not convicted of major war crimes. His record showed enforcement of Nazi law, but not participation in atrocities beyond this enforcement. He served 4 years in prison, then disappeared into the anonymity of post-war Germany. Hoffmann, the young SS soldier who had tried to organize Elsa's escape, emigrated to Argentina in 1948 and never spoke publicly about his service. Sturmbannführer Krebs was convicted of war crimes related to other cases and executed in 1947. Before his death, he wrote a letter to Elsa apologizing for the tribunal and acknowledging that he had known, even as he sentenced her, that the law he enforced had lost all moral foundation. She never responded to this letter, understanding that forgiveness was not hers to grant. The monastery was restored in 1952 and returned to Benedictine monks, who maintain a small plaque in the courtyard. In this place, March 20th, 1945, mercy confronted law, and history chose mercy. Each year on that date, a small ceremony is held, attended by fewer people as witnesses die and memory fades into archive. But for those who study that war, and that moment, the story remains: a woman who gave water, an empire that called this treason, and the 4 minutes of artillery fire that separated execution from survival. War tests many things, but nothing more severely than the human capacity to choose compassion when law demands cruelty. Sometimes the simplest acts of mercy require the greatest courage. Sometimes courage is rewarded only by survival, not by justice. And sometimes that is enough.